The American Adoption Congress 13th International Conference, April 11 to the 14th, 1991 in Garden Grove, California. This is program number D151, tape 28A.
Good morning. My name is Chris Probasco. I'm from the Kansas City area, and in Kansas City you work both in Missouri and Kansas if you're a practitioner in the area. So I have an office as a private practitioner both in Missouri and in Kansas. Before I go on further, I'd like to know where you are all coming from so I can maybe gauge that if there's more than one group represented. Usually this subject's of interest to adoptive parents and to practitioners. But are there members of the triad here, or are practitioners here? Okay, so you're all practitioners, all social workers. Okay, all right, well that makes it a little bit easier to gauge into then. People usually ask myself, as I'm sure they ask you, how'd you get into this business, and especially if you're not a member of the triad. And so I started out in practice in 1972, and I know I don't look my age, but I did. I started in 72. Started working for the State Department in foster care and adoption of older children, and I was there for 6 years. And then from there I went on to direct an adoption agency that did a lot of infant placements. So we worked with birth families and couples that were coming to us for infant placements, and of course a lot of infertility couples were coming to us because that was one of the requirements, that you had to be infertile and had to document your infertility in order to be part of the agency. While I was directing the agency, I also experienced my own infertility, so maybe that's one of the pluses that I've stayed here. So I rode the roller coaster and spent time in physicians' offices, spent time with fertility drugs and sex on demand and all the issues that I know you hear from your clients. I was successful in having birth children. I also had a pregnancy loss. We have 3 daughters, 2 by Clomid. I know you know that name if you're working with infertility folk, and then 1 that just decided to come on her own after 12 years of practice. So we have 3 daughters. From the adoption agency, within the adoption agency, I found myself become restless. It was a small agency, it was church-sponsored. I wanted to grow, and they particularly didn't want to grow. So from that agency, I then started working in infertility. I had a relationship with the reproductive endocrinologist that I was a patient with, and in fact he had sent a lot of his patients to me for adoption counseling. So in having that relationship, I joined his practice and then began efforts to bring a Resolve organization to Kansas City. Most of you know what Resolve is, okay. Kansas City is one of the largest cities in the nation, I think number 23, and we didn't have a Resolve organization. So I spent 2 years doing a lot of volunteer work, working with the hospital and working with the community to get Resolve in place in Kansas City. So we now have number 48th chapter of Resolve, and it's Resolve of Kansas City. I also did a lot of work in the infertility practice. I saw patients that were going to high-tech reproduction, in vitro fertilization, the GIF procedure, couples that were choosing donor, and the couples that were at the end of the road of infertility and looking at alternatives in terms of adoption and child-free living. So I've been in the infertility world as a professional for about how many years do we have now? About 8 years, I guess. Did both at the same time, adoption and infertility, and now back in private practice doing both. So I do a lot of pre-adoption counseling, I do some adoption work, and I do infertility counseling, part of the support group, lots of activities with the support group, organize a lot of community events that would be beneficial to people making family building choices. When I was at the adoption agency and really experiencing my own infertility, I was cold and indifferent. I had people call and say, you know, we still haven't given up on our infertility, but we want to consider adoption. And I would say, I'm sorry, you're not ready. You have to absolutely resolve your infertility before I will talk to you. And I hung up the phone, and I know there's a lot of angry adoptive parents out there that remembers my name and curses me out. But I've learned differently, and I feel much differently about it today than I did those years. I think in considering infertility, one needs to realize that it's a major crisis. And for some couples, it's maybe the first crisis that they have experienced. We see a lot of yuppies these days that are finally decided it's time to become pregnant, as it was time to get their advanced degrees, as it was time to get promotions at jobs, as it was time to buy in the best neighborhood, that's by the best schools, and to have bedrooms that was ready to have children, and now it's time to have children. And when the children do not come, it becomes an obsession for them, and they become addicted. And if there's any dysfunctional parts in their family of origin, then it really shows in terms of their obsession and their addiction. I think for us to understand that when people are coming to us in looking at adoption is very helpful. We need to understand that infertility is a crisis that affects many areas of who we are. It affects us physically. It affects us emotionally. It affects us psychologically, financially, spiritually, and sexually. Now, when we're talking about crises in life, usually we don't have that many areas of who we are being affected. It's also an individual crisis, it's a couple crisis, and also the extended family and friends. I remember when I was going through infertility, one of my friends said, "Chris, your head's in your ovaries all the time. You know, why don't you just come down to earth and be a friend?" Well, that was very offensive to me at the time, but I think she was right. I was obsessed. You know, every book that I could find, I absorbed and concentrated on. And extended families have a hard time, and friends, especially friends, have a hard time dealing with that. The extended family has their own loss. You mean I may not be a grandparent by birth? We may not be able to continue our family line, continue our heirs. You mean when we go to family picnics, we may have bring children that don't look like us there? And, you know, how can I talk to all the other women at club about my daughter being pregnant like they do? So the extended family has their own losses that they're dealing with, and usually are pretty free to talk about that, where the infertile couple feels not as free to talk about it. So what happens is, when the extended family are talking about their losses, then the infertility couple feels like more pressure. So I got to do it better. I got to go to the doctor more. I got to do it better. I got to make it happen. And I think once our foundation of fertility is shaken, that it resides with us forevermore. That feelings of inadequacy, feelings of being out of control, feelings of low self-esteem and sexual image are really carried along with us. For myself personally, I know when I became unexpectedly pregnant, I had dreamt about that for years and years and years, but I had made my family. My family was supposed to be older in terms of my dreams, and I was with young children, and I was ready to close that door. And then when the pregnancy came, it wasn't the dream pregnancy that I had hoped for. I felt out of control. I felt like, why now? You know, I wanted this years ago. So I had to go through all those kinds of issues that I was faced as an infertility patient. So I think when fertility issues are with us, in terms of their of being shaken by that, then it continues to be with us. When I was, again, at the adoption agency, I said, you know, you have to resolve your infertility. That's all there is to it. You have to shut the door behind it. I know better now. That's not possible. It's not possible to totally say goodbye to all the hopes and dreams that a pregnancy and a biological child means. So I see couples coming to peace with infertility. They're making a pact with infertility, that I no longer am going to put all my emotions and all my hopes and dreams, and it's no longer going to restrict me in terms of what I do, because you find a lot of infertility patients have just checked out in life. You know, the life as a train has been going by them. Women don't buy clothes because surely the next month I'll be pregnant and therefore I'll need maternity clothes. They don't change jobs because what will that mean about our insurance, and what will that mean about promotions, and I surely can't get promoted if I'm going to be pregnant. So they feel really stuck in life. Getting beyond that and dealing with infertility means that it's a process. It's a developmental process. And they let go of the intensity of infertility over time. So I think we need to be aware of that. A lot of adoptive families will say when the child comes to them through adoption that that's both a happy and a sad experience. If they're being real, they will say that. They're happy that they're now finally parents, but sad that this was not a child they gave birth to. When the child moves on in development, that also seems to be a reminder of letting go of the little child. And when you're an infertility patient, you only think about that baby and that baby coming home and rocking that baby, and that's the visualization that you have been focused on. When the child grows and develops, you're proud of that, but at the same time you realize that you're letting go of that baby. And so there tends to be infertility feelings at that time. Talking about adoption can be difficult. When the 3-year-old or the 4-year-old says in the grocery store, "And how did I get in your tummy?" And then you're choked in the throat saying, you know, you want to say that you did grow in my tummy, but you have to really choke your own feelings to say that, remember, you came to us by adoption. So that tends to be a difficult time. Talking about sexuality. Because you have all the double messages of couples that can get pregnant and couples that do get pregnant and unexpectedly pregnant, and those that work hard to get pregnant and don't get pregnant. So really, how do you explain sexuality in terms of maintaining self-esteem? Continuous physical symptoms of infertility, and this is especially true for women. Endometriosis is one of the culprits these days, and when you go on to become parents by adoption, that doesn't mean that the symptoms of your physical reaction to infertility stop. You still have painful periods. You may be looking at surgeries. You may be looking at taking hormones in order to regulate and to put your system into order. So you're still dealing with the after effects that infertility has brought to you. I really don't believe that infertility patients totally say goodbye to the fact that they will not be parents by birth until there's either an absolute diagnosis or menopause or hysterectomy. I think there's a thread of hope that continues on, and I think we have to respect that thread and not kill it in terms of how we see it being dangerous in the family. We even see grandparents reacting to their children by adoption having children. You know, they think, well, again, we're back at the card club. You know, my child's going to have a baby, and I'm so excited to be a grandmom. And then when we see baby, then we're reminded that baby is not genetically connected, and that there's also some happy and sad times with that. So if we can paint that picture to our infertility patients that come to you for adoption, they're going to hear you. They're not going to run away as quickly as if we're saying, you got to get all this settled. You have to come to peace with infertility, and you have to be able to recognize you're on a different road. But in terms of how you let go of that infertility, that's really your own process. I think it's well to understand what the infertility patient experiences in terms of treatment before they come to you. The average age of infertility patients is 30 plus, so most of the prospective adoptive parents that come to resources are 30 and above. Most have been married 5 years plus, so they have a long-term relationship in terms of marriage. Most have been trying to conceive for at least 3 years, and they will paint a very clear picture of what that's been like. They'll remember the exact month and season that they put away the birth control pills. And surely the next month we'll be pregnant, and then we'll have a Christmas baby, right? So they remember that scene. They can paint that scene for you very well. But by being in treatment, and trying to have children for 3+ years, that means they've had 36 pass and fail tests. Every month it becomes a pass and fail test. Am I going to achieve a pregnancy this month? And then there's the high, and then there's a low. So they've climbed many roller coasters and went up many, many ups and downs. So that does have an effect on their self-esteem. They usually have had 2 to 3 medical opinions in coming to some conclusions of their treatment. They also have probably had to make many decisions about continuing with treatment that reflect their crises. Finance is one of the big ones. When you become an infertility patient, you're really signing in for a lot of expensive treatment, diagnostic treatment as well as treatment to produce a pregnancy. Now, we all know about high-tech reproduction, and it's been around. Mary Louise Brown is now 11 years old, so the first in vitro baby is 11 years old. I remember hearing that story from England, and I said, well, surely it won't come over here, so I don't even have to worry about it. Well, it is here. The estimation are that there's about 15,000 babies that have been born by in vitro fertilization, so it is a large number of babies that are being born. So couples then become faced with, do I continue on with infertility treatment in terms of high-tech reproduction, or do I look at other alternatives? So in taking infertility history and their infertility story, look for crossroads. Look for decisions of continuing on. And that will give you some insight in terms of how much they've been paying attention to whether adoption is an alternative for them. I also recommend when couples come to me when they're starting to handle when is enough, that if they haven't seen a reproductive endocrinologist, which is the top person in terms of infertility treatment, I recommend that they do that. I recommend that when they look back on this package, that they feel that they did everything possible that they could medically, physically, emotionally, financially to bring a child home by birth. And that they look at each one of those resolutions in terms of, I did my best. Now, finances may be an area that they have to look at first because it's $6,000 per cycle to go with in vitro fertilization. So that may be an area that will stop them first in terms of going on any further. But look for those crossroads. Look for those decisions that they've made both in treatment and moving on to adoption. There's a poem that Barbara Eck-Menning has written about infertility that I think really says it all in terms of dealing with infertility over time. My infertility resides in my heart as an old friend. I do not hear from it for weeks at a time, and then a moment, a thought, a baby announcement, or some such thing, and I will feel the tug, maybe even be sad, or shed a few tears, and I think, there's my old friend. It will always be a part of me. So recognizing that, believing that it's part of who I am, regardless of how I become a parent. Infertility is part of who I am. And how I have dealt with that and come to peace with that is my mission in going on to become successful parents. A lot of people ask me, why can't I do infertility treatment and adoption at the same time? And I imagine you guys hear that a lot. Adoption takes so long, and why can't we just, be doing both at the same time? Well, my answer used to be, you can't. There's no way. But nobody listens to that. You have no room to negotiate. You have no room to work. If you're in a stance of saying everything has to be resolved before you look at any alternatives. So by my continuous work with infertility patients on dealing with decisions and choices, I've come up with some further insight. We need to understand that there is an intense drive to become parents. Now they have planned and they have postponed and they have arranged when children is going to come to them. And then when children doesn't come to them, then the drive becomes intense. So we need to understand that drive. They want to be like everybody else down the block. Now, if you talk to them about, their friends, they all have kids, and they have their 2.5 kids, and they're involved in daycare, and they're involved in the park, and where do we fit in? So they feel very alone, very isolated, and the drive is intense. So we need to hear that and understand that. The belief is if we let go of one process and put all of our energy into another process, and that doesn't work, then what are we going to have? There's a real common belief that if we choose adoption, we may not be able to be parents by adoption. So that's where the insecurity comes from their parenting abilities. And I think part of it is built into the adoption system. It is our responsibility as professionals to do education and evaluations and screening of potential adoptive parents, and that feels very threatening. That feels like, what do they have to be in order to be approved as adoptive parents? And so they have a real doubt that they can pass all the tests. They're usually successful people that have been successful in their own lives individually and as a couple and professionally, but then the doubt of, can we really pass the test and become adoptive parents? So it's real hard to let go of completely the infertility to put all of the thought into the adoption. The reality of it is, though, it takes lots of time, energy, and resources to do both infertility and adoption. And my feeling is that doing both at the same time intensely is that you're losing out. You're donating your friendships, you're donating your marriage, you're donating your family, you're donating your job. When you put that much intensity into a quest for a child, then where is the joy of life? And where is the marriage? Some of the saddest cases I've seen when I worked at the fertility center was once there was a pregnancy, then the divorce came. And that wasn't just one isolated case, that was several cases. So putting the energy into having children, you left everything behind, including the marriage. So doing both at the same time requires a lot from yourselves. And the focus is only child quest without having living the other parts of your life. There's also a danger of getting the issues confused. And I think that's what we worry about as professionals the most. Preparing to be parents by birth and preparing to be parents by adoption, unless it's in your family, unless you've seen your own family that was brought together by birth and adoption, that you have some similarity experiences, then I think you have more of a handle on it. But if you're working towards both being a parents by birth and parents by adoption, then I think there can be some difficulties. What I like to see is what I call a passive-active position. That when couples are coming to a closure on infertility treatment, when infertility patients are coming to the decision-making time, the crossroads, that I think it is healthy to start looking at the alternatives, to start looking at donor conceptions, child-free living, adoption. That gives them another focus, another place to put energy. I don't think you can do a home study and in vitro fertilization at the same time. It just takes too much to get all that done. So I'm pretty absolute by that. But I do see where couples can balance passive and aggressive approaches to having children. Aggressively approaching the infertility treatment, but perhaps having an adoption book beside their bed where they can read stories about adoption. And with the adoption drive, to perhaps not be so active in infertility, but being more active into the adoption area. In my area of the country, there's waiting list on agencies. And you're just a name on the list, and you're there for a year or two before you move up to the home study and the education and the process. I see that as a passive way of getting involved in adoption. That you can put your name on a list and it can be growing as you're putting all your efforts into infertility and seeing if an infertility pregnancy will be possible for you. I don't see that as being a confusion, and I don't see that as being ready for both at the same time, because they're really saying, I'm interested in adoption, and I want to see if it's going to be a possibility for me, but at the same time I'm going to give all my efforts to infertility. Now hopefully at the end of that 2 years, when you're at the top of the list, and then also you'll be finished with your infertility, you're ready to make some pretty clear choices. Now that seems to work for a lot of people. I think also in terms of infertility, couples need to come to a point of when is enough enough, and when are we ready to say we got to rest from this one. I see a lot of couples making a pact. Okay, by summer of whatever year, we're going to be finished. We're going to do one more in vitro fertilization. We got frozen embryos waiting for us. We're going to go and retrieve all those frozen embryos and see if we get a pregnancy. And if we don't, then we're ready to move on. So make some concrete plans that are short term. And so the feeling is that I'm not going to be an infertility patient for the rest of my life. I saw a woman in my office before I came that was 43 years old and been an infertility patient for 13 years. No one had sat down and talked to her about when is enough enough. She said, well, I just thought I'd do it forever. Short-term plans as infertility patients are very helpful. So they don't feel like I'm here forever. I'm going to be on this road forever. I'm going to be on this road for 6 months. My husband and myself have agreed I'm going to be on this road for 6 months. And at the end of that 6 months, we're going to know more about what happened with treatment, and we'll be able to make a decision. Now, we may continue to go on that road, but at least we've made a decision to reevaluate, and we stop checked. Now, that's very helpful in terms of self-esteem and self-image. And I think couples have a picture that once they enter into adoption that they can never go back to infertility treatment. And I used to be offended, really. When I was the director of the adoption agency, I was offended when couples would adopt a baby and then go back for infertility treatment. I thought I didn't do my job. I thought I hadn't convinced them enough that children by adoption was the way for them to go. I see that differently now. I see families differently now. Families come together in a variety of ways. They come together by birth. They come together by adoption. They come together by step-parenting. They come together by donor conceptions. They come together by taking care of friends and neighbors' children. So for couples to say, I'll never go back to infertility treatment once I've chosen adoption is asking too much. You're saying to absolutely let go of infertility and never think about being fertile again. So basically, by giving permission is that you can make choices. Once a child has come to you by adoption, you may want to go back and be an infertility patient for a few months. Or you may think, I don't want to get on that roller coaster again. But you have the confidence that you can make those choices and that those choices are clearer for you. So what my time in this business has taught me is that absolutes don't work. They're comfortable in terms of what you can lean upon, but they don't work in having your clients respond to you. I think we can have some checklist in terms of what does it mean to be ready to adopt. That is helpful in terms of coming to some conclusions of where we can be helpful for patients. The first one is that does the couple mutually agree that adoption is a good choice? Now, I don't know about you, but I've seen a lot of couples come in where the woman is usually the woman is many steps ahead in terms of ready to adopt before the husband is. In our Resolve organization, we talk about women being about 8 to 9 cycles ahead of their husbands. You know, we're all confirmed to cycles here. So questioning about, have you discussed mutually that this is a good choice for you individually and this is a good choice for you to become as a couple? And give permission that one may be ready before the other. But this is a major decision, And in all major decisions in most marriages, there has to be negotiation, there has to be compromise, and then come to the end conclusion that you're both at least mostly agree. The same goes with adoption. Pulling in one partner that's not ready to adopt is not going to end up in a very happy situation. Going public, telling others that you're going to become parents by adoption and that you're very proud of the choice that you've made. Now again, infertility patients are isolated. They usually don't tell very many people that they're infertility patients. The assumption around is that they like to be child-free and they like to have all the crystal on their glass tables. In reality, they're questing to have a family, but because it's involved with all the crises of sexuality and medical and physical and spiritual, that they don't freely talk about it. So going public, who have you told that you're planning to become an adoptive family? Well, I haven't told anybody. Well, that's a sign that they need to do some work on that one. They need to tell their parents, they need to tell their families, and they need to deal then with all the myths out there that they will be confronted with. Go on a vacation, switch sides of the bed. Once you adopt, you'll have your own. So all those myths then will be coming to them as they go public. So we as practitioners need to be prepared for those myths and educate them about it. There's a wonderful pamphlet put out by Sandoz Pharmaceuticals about the myths of infertility, which include if you adopt, you'll get pregnant. I think arming them with those is like giving them an armor to go out there to be public with. Oh, I know that's a wise tale. National Resolve surveyed their 15,000 members and found out that pregnancy after adoption happens about 5% of the time. So I think everybody knows the same person, really, when they're talking about, oh, I know so-and-so that, adopted a baby and then got pregnant. And it also gets into their gut in terms of what is my motivation to become an adoptive family. Is it to parent a child or is it to get pregnant? And how much do they buy into those myths? So it's a real good test area. Reading adoption and parenting literature. Getting informed. Again, putting an armor on so that they can go forth as an educated consumer, because when you choose to become an adoptive family, you will need to educate those around you. So you need to educate yourself first and feel positive about the information that's coming to you before you can educate those around you. Most infertility patients do not pick up parenting magazines, baby magazines. They go in the bookstore and they see Baby Talk and all that, and they talk about leaving crying because that's all they see when they go into a bookstore. So encourage them that you will become parents. I say in the 18 years that I've been doing this practice, I have not met a couple that has been together and willing to become adoptive parents and hasn't been able to do that. So they need that hope, they need that reassurance, and they need to get involved with, you're going to become a parent. So what does that mean to you in terms of parenting? So encourage the reading of adoption and parenting literature. A friend of mine, Ellen Curtis, that's a facilitator for private adoption placements, has homework that she sends out to couples in preparing to be adoptive parents that is on parenting and adoption issues, bonding and attachment, entitlement, and she has them write reports to come back. That's another way of getting the teaching done out there. Recognizing that adoption is a different path to become parents, and that adoption brings additional parenting tasks along with that. I see it as switching roads. You've been on the road to become genetic parents for a long time. You've seen the dream child at the end of the road that had characteristics of your family, that was the love between the husband and wife. And now to move over to another road and create a new dream of meeting a child by adoption, being excited by that child, having unconditional love, and being entitled to parent. Now those are all hard lessons to come to, but can be done. I do a lot of visualization when I talk about the moving over, and really where you can end that road means, for infertility, means you can come back to it. You've created pieces, you've created a journey, and you need to come to peace with that, but you can come back to it. Now you're creating a new road, a new opportunity, and a new dream, and that can be as positive in coming to terms with being a family. Recognizing that there's different parenting tasks. I really believe that when couples come to educational classes about adoption, of course that's all we talk about is adoption, and then we talk about, you know, the assets and the liabilities of becoming an adoptive family, and all they hear is, you know, this is going to be tough, and I'm going to have to deal with this every day. But I think in reality, for adoption issues, that it's a small percentage of time that adoptive families really are concentrating on adoption issues. The rest of the time, they're getting the kids back and forth to school, they're doing soccer, they're doing t-ball, they're doing music lessons, they're being like everybody else on the block, which they so desperately want to be. But in addition to that, they have additional tasks, and recognizing what those tasks are. And if you were to ask the question, becoming an adoptive family, how do you see yourself being different than other families? Now you're going to get some twisting around and some jerking around, because they don't want to be different than any other families. They've been striving so hard to be like everybody on the block that they don't want to be different. So you start out with, you know, you're going to bring a baby home. The baby's going to be going through developmental issues. They're going to be going to preschool. They're going to be going to school. You know, you will be like all the other parents on the block. And then you will have additional responsibilities in terms of talking to the child about adoption, in terms of birth families. And being prepared for that means that at this time, you're going to be spending probably unproportional amount of energy into getting ready for that. But that will then prepare you for those tasks over the lifetime. Acceptance that the dream, love, fantasy child that you have conceptualized in your fantasies will not be the child you receive by adoption. Women tell me, and it's true of my own life, that they spend years preparing to bring this baby into existence. Now, I think probably some of you can remember as small children taking care of baby dolls, strolling the baby dolls in the stroller. I have 3 daughters, and I have all gone through baby tending, baby carrying, being a mama, breastfeeding. I mean, they've done all these things, getting themselves ready, I think, psychologically to be a mom. So you talk to women about being moms, and they have, you know, 20, 30 years invested into being a mom. And that baby that they were going to parent is a baby that came from them, and a baby that came from the love between they and their husband. So that's a hard bond to break in terms of looking at another child and creating another dream child. So the recognition that the love, dream, fantasy child that you have been carrying around for years will not be the child that you receive by adoption. Take some tears, take some grief, take some effort to come to terms with, but it can be done. And how do you do that? How do you trade loyalties? I hear a lot of couples in conflict with, well, you know, if we go on for adoption, I really don't want you to think that we've given up hope. You know, like they have to prove something to me.
Yeah, in dealing with that issue, particularly from an adoption agency's
This is the end of Side A. Please turn your tape over and continue on Side B. The American Adoption Congress 13th International Conference, April 11 to the 14th, 1991 in Garden Grove, California. This is program number D151, tape 28B.
I had an upset stomach when I left. My shoulders hurt. I was the bad guy. How dare you talk about our infertility? That is dead and gone, has no relevance to what's going on with our child. It was like it was a brick wall, and no matter what you do, you're not going to get through it. One woman was so upset, she walked out the door and walked home, 8 miles. She walked home, left her husband behind.
Say something?
It's very clear, but they haven't asked me back. And I think it's because it's not, it's so buried and deep that no matter how, maybe I wasn't gentle enough. And I think I need to do some hand-holding, perhaps, in coming to that. I hit him pretty hard. I hit him with all the information I'm giving you today. I think to get to the infertility issues with an adolescent acting out adoptee, it has to be done one-on-one and as a couple together. And I think in a group educational setting, it's just too much. Just too much. It's like all the feelings of anger came together in one bullet, and I was being shot down. It was. Maybe it was me. Maybe I just don't want to do it again. But I think talking individually to each partner and together as a couple.
It's like blaming the victim again. That their infertility is causing possibly the acting out or the behavior of the child. And it's easy to think that it might be the genetic background.
Well, it's not accepting the whole again. Yeah. It's like everything they do. This is part of the bargaining. Everything they do well, it's because they're part of our family, and everything they do bad, it's because they come from the birth family. So it's not accepting that child unconditionally. Let's see, where am I in? I think also talking about sexuality is again difficult in adoptive families. I had a woman come in that she was 21, 22, and she was an adoptee, and she was just about ready to get married. And she said, I don't know what's going to happen to me. My husband wants to have babies. I really don't want to have babies. I have all these mixed feelings out there. I think I'm either going to be very fertile or I'm going to be infertile, and if I want to have a baby and then I can't have a baby, then I'll be like my adoptive family, and that didn't feel so well to me. And I said, well, you can make choices. And she said, well, you're either real fertile like your birth family out there, or you're infertile like your adoptive family. And I said, well, you can choose not to have children. So she had a lot of mixed messages. I hear a lot of mixed messages from in adolescence in terms of fears of getting pregnant. If you go out there and get yourself pregnant, then you're going to be just like your birth family, and then what are you going to do? So there's a real unclearness about sexuality, about feelings of joy that's connected to sexuality, being a sexual being, that it's all connected to either you have a baby or you don't have a baby. And so I hear poor sexual images and poor sexual self-esteem about being a sexual person, and really being that's part of me, and that I can have pleasure as being sexual, that doesn't have to be connected to whether I can get pregnant or not get pregnant. So that tends to be an issue. Entitlement versus ownership. Ellen Curtis did a presentation yesterday, and if you didn't go to her presentation, I recommend you get her tape. I think because infertility patients have derived so much and have so much motivation and have put so much into getting children, that they feel that they have a title to that child, that they own that child belongs to them. And I think that happens whether they get pregnant after intense infertility, because they've put down thousands of dollars to get pregnant, or that also happens when they've put a lot into adoption and put down money and energy to get the child. I own that child, and therefore that child is mine. Moving them from the ownership into entitlement is a job that I think happens continuously. That the adoptive parents are entitled to parent, that it's a claiming behavior, they have a right to parent, they're worthy to parent, they're deserving, they're qualified, they have unconditional love, they have all these gifts to give to a child, rather than to own that child and to have that child be part of them. When you talk about ownership, you talk about property, possessions, control, power. Kids don't do well when they're being controlled. When the adoptive parents are in power of them, they don't do well. Entitlement versus ownership is a continuous issue throughout adoptive families that we need to be aware of as clinicians. You hear a lot of adoptees talk about the conditional love. I'll love you only if you do this. I won't love you if you search a reunion. If you search, I won't love you. I'll take my love away. And that's their power, and that's their control. And when you have adoptees that want to take care of, want to protect, need to be part of their family for their family to be whole, then there's very intense issues. And I think that's one of the facts that a lot of adoptees do not search until their adoptive parents are deceased. They've done their job, they've been part of that family, they've taken care of that family, and now they're free to have their birth family experiences. Okay. Any questions about this?
I guess just a statement that you were just talking about search and adoptees, and being an adoptive parent. I went to the workshop on men's issues of adoption.
I did too. Mm-hmm.
And one of the adoptees was talking about his search, and when he finally found his birth mother, it was just a picture because she was deceased, and how it made him feel complete. And it was so important. I got sad because there was a sense that an adoptee is able to do that, but infertile couples, even though they can adopt, can't get a picture of the biological.
Right.
Yeah, they
Right.
can't get close.
Right. That's very intuitive. And they have to invent their own closure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the idea with the doll and the ceremonies. I think it's important for a lot of couples to have that ceremony. Now, I get a lot of anger when I talk about that ceremony. I get a lot of sadness and a lot of uncontrollable crying, but that's the button that needed to be pushed. You know, as therapists, I think we have a tough job in that we got to find those buttons and push them, and so it's real uncomfortable. But once it's digested, then the anchors are gone. You're no longer dragging around the fantasies. And I think bonding and attachment is freer when the child by birth has come to rest. And I don't think you have as many loyalty issues that if I love this child, does that mean that that I love this child by adoption more than I would have loved my child by birth? Surely not. But love is a feeling, love is an emotion. And you have lots of different kinds of love. And you loved your child by birth, and you deserve to have rest and peace. That seems to connect to infertility patients more than anything that I've stirred up in my past years. And I think it's just because I have a deeper understanding of that movement. And even being an adoptive father today, still, in terms of the closure, that, you know, I wish I could see a picture of my child. As an adoptee, you can see a picture of their birth family. Yeah.
In terms of the entitlement versus ownership, I did attend that. One of the things, I'm from the adoption administrator with an adoption agency, and one of the things that we did was create a ritual that once it's the placement ritual, and we've even included birth parents now handing the child over to the couple, and everyone's there, even staff, it's open. And we start out the ceremony by saying, your children are not your children. It's Cahill Gibran's speaking on children, and the whole poem talks about you can house their bodies but not their souls because they have their own souls. They're of course, in fact, the agency video that talks about the house of tomorrow. And when you can see I performed this.
Are you from Hope Cottage?
Huh?
Are you from Hope?
Hope Cottage,
yes.
Yeah. And when you see their faces, when you talk about interesting with adoptive fathers, when you start out with that poem, it's really very blank. But when you get to the very end, at the end of the poem says something about the archer leaves its mark in the path of the infinite, and so he loves the arrow that flies, so he also loves the bow that is stable. They're pretty often in tears, but more so the adoptive fathers. Interestingly enough, you get a lot of emotion related to that. It's pretty flat to begin with. When you get down to the end of it, it becomes a very emotional kind of an experience. And I have seen more adoptive fathers cry at that point than adoptive mothers. And then we move on with the ceremony. And we give them the poem when they leave, hoping that maybe somebody will frame it or take a look at it later on. I guess our hope is that they will own less of their children, and that there is a sense of doing it differently.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we've learned. Adoption professionals have learned over time. I mean, I remember 18 years ago talking about, this is just like having a baby of your own. I mean, I bought into it too. Yeah, because it was less painful for me. I didn't have to get into my gut. But the further I moved along, and as Annette Barron talked about taking your blinders off, I mean, it's a revolutionary experience. I remember when I was an infertility patient and director of the adoption agency, it really wasn't the birth families that I was jealous of. It was the adoptee families that were in the process and then got pregnant. I was very jealous of them, very intense, in fact to the point where I had to turn the cases over to someone else. So it's hard to deal with your own feelings when you're in that process, but recognizing it can be helpful. Okay.
Do you find that sometimes, well, I've heard adoptees talk about that adoption was just talked about so much that they were almost sick of hearing it. It seems like sometimes families can set up that everything that happens is because this is an adoption, instead of that some of the cases, I mean, it's because we're humans and these kind of things happen.
Right,
One of the things that I sometimes talk about with parents is that most kids at some point say to their parents, I wish you weren't my parents. And a lot of adoptive parents sometimes take that so personal instead of, and sometimes there may be something to it, but sometimes there's not. It's
right.
Family thing that comes
And I hear that a lot, and I have a 10-year-old that's very outspoken. She's quite a bit like her mother, but I go to a lot of adoption picnics, a lot of adoption parties. I'm connected to these families. And a few months ago, we were having an argument, and she said, well, if I was adopted like all those other families, you wouldn't be treating me like this. So I think kids use whatever kind of ammunition they got. And if we feel whole and complete as a parent, and we're entitled to parent, and this is the situation that I'm in, and this is the situation that you're in, and we're just going to get through it. Ken Watson does the adoption dance, and I don't know if any of you have ever seen him do that, where adoptee families can be on one end or the other. But where they need to be is in the middle, kind of dancing with both. And so some days, they talk about adoption a lot, and other days they don't. And so the middle is where the healthy balance is. I've seen families that announce to everybody that this is their child by adoption. They go in the grocery store and the clerk says, oh, what a cute little child. Yes, and he was adopted. Well, that doesn't belong there. Or, on the other extreme where they don't talk about adoption at all. Well, he's never asked, so why should we talk about it? What's healthy is being in the middle. And I think families go through developmental processes where adoption is more of an issue than at other times. Babies coming home, they're settling in, they're becoming parents, they're adjusting to becoming new parents, they're having all the pats on the back, you know, the child is responding to them, they're bonding, they're attaching, and that's why you see the parents coming out basically when their kids are 2 to 3 years old and wanting to re-educate themselves. Well, they're going back to the other side, and so they may educate for a while and then they'll go back and take the skills home. So it's that continuous dance, and as long as we keep moving in it and we're not stuck in one extreme to the other, then that's where you have families that are flexible and that it won't get to their gut when it's told, you're not my real mom, and if my real mom was here, she'd let me stay out to 2 o'clock in the morning. You have to be able to be clever enough as parents to separate what's a parenting issue and what's an adoption issue. I use an example when I talk to couples of, you know, the child comes home, they're 17 or 16, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and they're 2 hours past their curfew. You waited up for them, they come in, and you say, okay, we got consequences. And then their immediate response is, well, if I wasn't adopted, you wouldn't do this. Well, this isn't part of your adoption. If you want to talk about your adoption, we'll do that tomorrow morning. What we're going to talk about is the fact that you were 2 hours late, and we're parents, and we need to be you need to be responsible, and we need to be responsible. And we're being parents today. We're being parents right now. So feeling confident in yourself so the adoption doesn't throw you off means that you've had years of adjusting and believing and claiming and being entitled to parent this child, and to parent this child in the way that you believe is best. So the continuous movement.
I think there is a piece to what you brought up, because since we had, my wife and I adopted my daughter, there came a point where I said, are we going to ever be around couples who have biological children? Because it was constantly adoption picnics, Christmas parties, I mean, this organization, that organization. It did start to get a little, that we were living in adoption constantly.
Well, and I think that's a little unreal picture, because when the child goes to school, there's going to be a variety of family situations that are present in that room. I like to see adoptive families and families by donor and families of step families. You know, there's all many families. And what's good about families is that we love each other and we're here to take care of each other. You know, that's the basis. And how we joined each other is a different story. So I think it can be too much. So keeping in the middle is what, yeah.
I think part of this is a direct result of the old closed adoption syndrome, that for the last few years adoptive couples have been in the learning about and participating in openness and the awareness of adoption issues, which were never discussed 15 and 20 years ago with adoptive couples. And there's been almost an overemphasis on pathology as opposed to health. And that is, I think, a cycle that probably is going to...
We got to balance too. As professionals, we have to balance.
Exactly.
You know, and that's why people say, well, you know, we're going to do adoption we're going to talk about adoption all the time. Well, no, you're not. You're going to be everyday parents most of the time, probably 95% of the time. You're going to be parents that are doing parenting things, but you need to be prepared and not afraid to deal with the adoption issues as they come up within you and as they come up with your child. That's part of who we are. That's like our right arm. You know, if we cut that off, then we're not as whole. That's part of how we got together. We're proud of that. We'll talk to anybody about it that asks or listen, but we don't have to drum it down our throats all the time. And I think that's part of the strive that infertility patients and then adoptive parents want to be like the majority of folk out there that settle into lives of raising kids. And I think you're entitled to that also. It's just that that because we didn't do our adoption education as adoption social workers many, many years ago, we feel a burden and a responsibility to do it real well. And you're going to hear everything I have to say. Well, you know, you can't digest it all, you know. You got to stretch it over time. You know, this is a developmental process. It was a developmental process for me, and so it's going to be a developmental process for you. You know, I'm going to be in this business for a while. Check in. You know, a commitment to the families over time, I think, needs to be connected to placing agencies. You know, you've given them everything to begin with that you know, and then to send them out without patting them on the back it's not completing the package. They need pats on the back. They need re-educated. They need to be in a group of adoptive parents, and then they need to be in a parenting class where you have variety of people coming. I did a presentation to a group of adoptive parents. In Missouri, we have a program called Parents as Teachers, and they have a program where parents are connected to the school system for the first 3 years of their child's life. So they do a lot of developmental classes. They have sponsors come out to their home, talk a lot about parenting issues, and then just one of the classes is for adoptive parents. So it's just one of the agenda items rather than the only agenda item. And that feels so healthy to me. Okay, any other comments or?
Just another comment. Going through the infertility and going through the adoption process, and getting involved in adoption, working with an agency that is a private agency that has a fee for adoption. I've been at this conference. I've been feeling like I've been hiding out a little bit. It's been geared more towards birth mothers, adoptees, and I've been feeling guilty, bad, or I've been feeling like the infertility.
You're feeling kind of equal in here, because that's the way
The infertility stuff has been coming up. I feel like I'm continuing to be punished.
Mm-hmm. For being an adoptive parent.
Yeah. Adoptive parent, and working with an agency that charges a fee.
Yeah, I hear all that. My first AAC conference was 6 years ago, and I came home and I was never going to do adoption again. You know, I felt the responsibility of every birth family, every adoptee, every adoptive family that I told, you know, you'll go on and forget it. But you do the best you can at the time.
But as you talk about workshops and groups for adoptive parents, this also comes up again. If an agency doesn't have the funds or is not willing to pay, I feel uncomfortable charging couples for, you know, the work. It comes up over and over again.
But, you know, any place they go to have work done, they pay. I mean, that's just part of the world out there. You know, I charge $15 for a couple to come in. You know, that's not a lot of money, but it pays for me, pays my bills. I can't keep giving away. You know, I gave away for so long. I felt so responsible for all these families. I worked 50, 60, 70 hours a week, basically neglected my own children in doing that because I felt so responsible in making these families work. Well, we got to let go too. We did our best. Choices were made. We didn't make those choices. Choices were made, and then we'll continue to feed along the way. But that has to come with some kind of price. That's just the world we live in.
As a social worker, that's not new. Whether it's adoption or whatever it is, and we're just supposed to give all our services away. I mean, you know, that's the whole concept of a social worker anyway. And you know, so it's not just for adoption. So you have to back up and say, well, you have the right to feel that way, and it's your choice whether or not you will come in for that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like her. I mean, I have bills to pay, mouths to feed, house to keep over my head. And
I'm real glad you said what you said too. I'm an adoptive parent, I'm a social worker, you know, I work in an adoption agency. And so we kind of said today, we're going to slink in because we're 3 times bad at this conference. And I think you have to recognize where we are. There are a lot of angry people here with unresolved issues who had a lot of bad things happen to them, but it's not my fault and it's not your fault. And we can feel pain for them, but we can't begin to feel like we're bad people. I mean, I'm finding I really have to keep saying to myself, you're not a bad person, you know. You're in a conference where there are a lot of people in pain.
Because there's blanket statements that are made, like, I mean,
Yeah.
I've heard social workers and therapists tell adoptees to repress their feelings. I've never told anybody to repress their feelings. I don't care who they are or what they're going through. I've never said that. And I get angry when I hear that. I'm going, now wait a minute. You're saying I say that. Yeah, and
I think I'm feeling less of that as a social worker and more of it as an adoptive parent.
And how does the infertility issue play into that? And how does the infertility reminders, where is that at?
I don't elaborate on that. The infertility, how's it come up?
Yeah, how's it come up for you?
Well, I think there's some unresolved issues. That's what I'm dealing with here in the conference.
And I, you know, the unresolved issues are going to be there and they're going to be worked out over time. The main focus is to be able to manage those feelings and not to have those feelings get in the way of the parent-child relationship. They're yours. And taking responsibility and ownership for those are my feelings connected to me, and they're not connected to the child.
What I was thinking about was I saw something on TV about, it was one of the news shows, 20 minutes, 48 minutes, whatever it is, where they had reunions. They were showing some reunions, and there was a meeting between an adoptee and a birth mother, and the adopted parents were there, and they were like in the background. They panned on them, and how nervous they were, and like they were crying, and that's how I've been feeling here, like in the background.
Yeah.
But relating to a lot of the feelings that the other side is having.
Well, because they're similar feelings. Yeah. The social work field is starting to pick up on infertility as an issue. I don't know if those of you that are social workers received the NASW newsletter, but they finally did an article on infertility. It was a one-pager, but they did it. So I brought copies for you, and I was, I guess, proud enough to underline where my part was at. But it's encouraging. It's encouraging that we're starting to learn more about infertility as it relates to adoption. I'm also very active in the American Fertility Society, which I find myself educating about infertility in the adoption world and then educating about adoption in the infertility world. But let me tell you, it's a schizophrenic world out there, because I belong to AAC, where openness is only the way to go, and then belong to the Fertility Society, where everything is secret and everything is hidden, and hopefully an impact can be made on both. Okay, thank you very much for your time and attention and smiles and questions, and it helps. Great.
This concludes this session.